Hello, everyone. Thank you for attending today's webinar, Looking Beyond Traditional Methods, New Ways to Support Employee Mental Health. My name is Shane McNally. I'm the Marketing Specialist with R3 Continuum, and I'll be helping moderate today's webinar. Our subject matter experts today are R3 Continuum's Associate Medical Director, Dr. Tyler Arvig, as well as Sarah Hathaway, Associate Director of Strategic Solutions. A couple items to go over real quick before we begin. There are a handful of different widgets and pop-ups on your screen. You'll be able to find the Q&A widget, which you can ask questions throughout the webinar, technical issues or otherwise. You'll also find our resource list, which offers a handful of links to various resources as well as downloadable content, including the slide deck from today. There's also a link to register for our next webinar in September, a link to Workplace MVP, which is a podcast that R3 Continuum is now sponsoring that highlights organizations' most valuable professionals as they share their stories. At the bottom of the screen, you'll also see a survey widget. If you have the time, please answer the 2 questions on there and they'll help us for our future webinars. Today's webinar is a continuing education webinar, which means it's been pre-approved to equal 1 hour of continuing education credits by the Commission of the Case Manager, also known as CCM. And R3 Continuum is also excited to announce that we are now approved for SHRM recertification provider. This means we'll be offering 1 professional development credit, or a PDC, for the SHRM certification program. These will be available for most of our upcoming webinars, so keep an eye out for those in the future. At the end of the webinar, you'll be asked to complete a quick evaluation. Once you complete the evaluation, you'll be provided access to a downloadable certificate of completion. Please note you can find the test and certificate in the widget tools. So with that, let us introduce our presenters today. Dr. Tyler Arvig has over 13 years of domestic and international experience in behavioral health workplace absence, including disability and workers' compensation assessment, consultation with employers and insurers on complex claims, effective return to work strategies, program development and improvement, and supervision and training of industry professionals. He's a sought-after speaker, writer, and contributor in the field of workplace behavioral health and workplace trauma recovery. Our other presenter is Sarah Hathaway. With over a decade of experience in social and behavioral health services, Sarah has served as a leader supporting individuals and organizations in both the public and private sectors. She has extensive knowledge of disaster mental health and workplace well-being services. Sarah is an internationally recognized trainer who has presented and instructed on areas including workplace well-being, crisis response, trauma recovery, resiliency, secondary traumatic stress, civil unrest, and racial trauma, cultural competency, and organizational culture. She has provided direct support to victims of crime and disasters across the United States, including providing on-scene command of psychological support services for criminal trials and providing advocacy for child assault and mass violence victims. Sarah is a leading partner for R3C's training and advocacy resources services, providing tailored strategies to meet individual and organizational needs. So with that, let's get started with the presentation, and I will toss it over to Tyler.
Thank you, Shane, and thank you, Sarah. It's my pleasure to be with both of you and with all of you attending today to talk about this topic. This is something that those of us in this organization have been working on really nonstop in our many, many years of experience, but particularly in the past 2 years, as the landscape has changed. And so I'm glad you joined us. We have a lot of people here in attendance, and I think that reflects on the need out there. There's a real quantifiable, identifiable need to support our people. And so just to get us started, and I know these are some statistics, and these are, gives you these statistics give you kind of a macro picture, but I also realize that all of us have our own experiences and have seen this in our day-to-day lives as well. But just to get a scope of the problem, about almost 20% of adults are living with some form of mental illness right now. So 2 in 10. Over 80% are perhaps crossing that burnout rate or the burnout threshold, feeling burned out. And 9 in 10 workers report that workplace stress impacts their mental health. Okay, so this is none of this is probably news to anyone here on this presentation today, but it's just a bit of a jumping off point for what Sarah and I are going to talk about. And now I'm going to turn it over to my co-presenter, Sarah.
Thank you, Tyler, and thank you, Shane. Thank you all for being here as well. Just to really add to some of what Tyler just highlighted here, again, with approximately 1 in 5 people experiencing a mental illness in any given year, it really highlights the need for mental health support services. McKinsey did a recent study around the need for mental health services, and while approximately 24% of employees, and similar to that 1 in 5 ratio, need psychotherapy, and even in addition to that, there's 1% of individuals who need really intensive mental health treatment. There's this other 75% of individuals that aren't captured there that require some type of mental health support. And there are many ways that each of us can access mental health support, whether it's within our own social systems, within our own benefits, resources, things of that nature. But it highlights the importance of providing this support within the workplace, especially when we're talking about such high burnout rates and the fact that 90% of individuals are reporting that work stress is a significant source of mental health concerns. So here really sets that foundation for why workplaces need to offer these supports. And our goal here is really to talk about how we help to not only serve that 24%, that 1%, but how to meet the needs of that other 75%, and also help to funnel individuals into additional support when it may be needed.
I think we went one too many. That's what happened. We both have control of the slides. Yeah, I mean, just to tag on to what Sarah said, really what those stats mean to me as an expert and someone who's consulted in the field, as Sarah has and many of us have, is more people than not need some support right now from a mental health standpoint. We've typically thought about, you know, those in the population of having mental illness as being the minority. And in terms of diagnosable conditions, that's probably still true. But the reality is it's now the majority of folks that are struggling with something. And I think we can all understand why that is. So, you know, let's look at kind of what I like to think of as the 3 buckets of options that employers have right now, or employees have, I should say. And I'm going to start on the right-hand side because it's where we normally think to start, which is this is traditional care, right? This is, I have my private health insurance, I see my private doctor, you know, Blue Cross Blue Shield, Health Partners, whoever it is. If I need health care, that's where I'm going to go. Kind of the traditional, I need to see a psychiatrist, I'll see a psychiatrist. If I need to see a therapist, I'll see a therapist, general practitioner, whatever you happen to have. On the left-hand side are our employee assistance programs. And we're going to talk about those more in just a minute, but this is what we're all used to in terms of an employer-sponsored type of program, right? What options are we giving to our people to support them? And, you know, this, in many ways for the employee, might look and feel similar to the first thing we talked about, in as much as I'm going to call, they're going to find me a provider, and I'm going to be set up. Now, EAPs have other services as well, but in the context of this discussion, talking about support, particularly for mental health, it's probably going to look somewhat similar, although it's you know, for most employees, it's a free benefit. They're not paying anything for it, but it's going to look and feel similar to the traditional care. The third bucket, or the middle bucket, is what we're calling proactive support, which is what we're going to be focused on in this presentation more. And this is really, you know, some people will be caught by the bucket on the left, some people will be caught by the bucket on the right, but there's a whole swath of people that are going to miss both, either because they're reluctant to reach out or they're not sure how to do it, but they still need something. And that's what we're talking about here. In mental health, in behavioral health, we talk about prevention being much more valuable than intervention, in as much as if I can get out ahead of something, I can usually act in more specific and, sorry, let me back up. If I get out ahead of something, my intervention is usually less intensive and needs to be less intensive versus if I wait for something to snowball into a much larger problem. So with the proactive support, that's really what we're talking about there. How do we get out ahead of some of the more significant things that might show up in traditional care? I'm going to hand it over to my colleague here.
Thanks, Tyler. As Tyler's referring to these three different buckets of care, I want to highlight a little bit of what we look for when we're talking about that need for support. Oftentimes, we recognize some of the internal, what's going on with a person that may indicate that somebody's needing some additional care. So the most basic, when somebody tells you that they're feeling distressed, or feeling stressed, it might also be some behavioral changes like productivity, or maybe somebody who's less focused in meetings or having difficulty recalling information that was told to them. Might also notice changes in mood, attitudes, engagement in work. Maybe they're just really not participating or self-isolating. And some who just are less likely to show up to work because they're just not feeling well. But there are all of these other factors outside of that individual that can indicate that some support is necessary. It could be that they're just balancing so many things, a high workload or personal stressors, changes throughout someone's life that can require just, again, another level of support or an outside resource. It may be that your organization is going through some sort of change or that there's some conflict maybe within or across teams. These are all things that can impact an individual's stress and ability to cope. So when we look at these support needs, again, these are those things that sometimes are a little bit more of the obvious ones. They stand out as situations where individuals might not be able to cope on their own or might just benefit from some additional support and care. But as I mentioned before, anyone can benefit from that proactive support, that wellness support. So while we're looking at some of the more common things that we tend to see in the organization here, these are not requirements or criteria for referring someone to any level of mental health service.
Yeah, and Sarah, if I can just tag onto that for just a quick second. I'm going to go back to this slide because really of these 9 categories on here, I think over the past year and a half, I've covered all of them at one point or another. These are not, I mean, we all recognize the individual who's suicidal as needing mental health support or reports severely depressed mood. But these are more categories and issues and things that even those that haven't experienced a traditional mental health concern in the past probably have experienced over the past, almost 2 years now. So again, we're not talking about the small minority. We're talking about really the majority. So at this point, we want to introduce a poll. And this is, you can choose as many as apply to what you're seeing in your current environment, but what challenges are impacting your workforce? I'm going to move on and see if I can get the poll to populate. So you should be able to now select the options, and again, select as many as apply to you. High-stress work environment, workplace conflict, work-life imbalance, rise in pandemic-related risks, economic challenges, family stressors, high turnover, fear or frustration about returning to the office, remote work limitations, or you're not seeing any of these things. Everything's about the same as it's always been. We'll just give a few seconds for folks to respond, and we'll see what people have to say. All right, I'm going to advance on to the next one. We'll see what we have. I always love doing this presentation. You never know what you're going to see. What do we got? It looks like the winner, if that's the appropriate term here, the graph is that, rise in pandemic-related risk, 70%. We also have family stressors at 65%, high-stress work environments at 57%, work-life imbalance is up there, turnover is up there. Really the only, in one person at least, nothing, everything's about the same. What do we make of this, Sarah?
Well, I have to say that the answer none is probably the most surprising here. Again, many of these things are very relatable and part of why the responses are so high in so many categories, because these are common situations that workplaces across the country and around the world are dealing with. Family stressors, parents with kids at home who are trying to figure out how to balance school and work, individuals who are struggling with childcare issues or maybe caring for a sick loved one. The work environments as well, they've become more stressful as individuals have had to adapt to working from home or working in higher stress, higher demand environment, or maybe even working in a high risk situation, just things like healthcare.
Yeah, that's great, Sarah. And the one thing that I guess I want to highlight that I wouldn't have expected to see at this point, but it's a reflection of our current state, which is rise in pandemic-related risks is up there a ways. And given our current state of vaccination in many areas, we would have thought to expect this to have decreased. But I think with the Delta variant increasing and the return to office becoming more of a reality, we're seeing more of those types of concerns, which maybe we hadn't planned for at this point. But I think that's an interesting thing to see. Sarah mentioned family stressors. I think, we're coming back into, going back to school. And we don't exactly, where I'm at, Minnesota, we don't exactly know how that's going to look. We're hoping, but we're not exactly sure. Those stressors are significant, and they're real, and they apply to a lot of your workforce, even if your workforce doesn't have kids, because they probably have kids in their lives or they're helping their coworkers that have kids. So interesting results. And I will move us on. Sarah, unless anything else on here that you want to highlight?
No, I think that pretty well covers it.
Cool. Thanks, everyone, for participating. This is really helpful information. I think it feeds in well to some of what we're going to talk about here in the next section.
So we've referenced a little bit about employee assistance programs, but I want to dive in a little bit deeper to talk about how EAPs help to address this overall picture that we've been talking about. And I think the first thing to recognize is that when it comes to mental health and well-being, the EAP's role is typically, it falls within that brief solution-focused space of psychotherapy. So it's rarely for that high-intensive treatment that individuals may need. So we're not talking generally about inpatient services or long-term therapy. We're generally talking about anywhere from 1 to maybe 12 sessions at most of treatment or mental health support. And the EAP is really there as this safety net. When employees need support, it's available. Generally, it's 24/7. They can get access to therapists fairly quickly. And so it's something that allows companies to reach any employee who may want to take advantage of that support. But there are some limitations here when it comes to employee assistance programs. And one being that utilization tends to be fairly low. It requires employees to take advantage of that phone number, to reach out and make that phone call. So there are some times when it may be helpful to make a referral to the EAP. And some of those things that we want to look for are if there's an early mental health concern, if an individual maybe isn't established with any sort of treatment, but there are some concerns that indicate potential mental illness and mental health challenge, that's an appropriate time to refer to EAP. As well as if there are any performance issues that might be impacted by mental health concerns. If you're noticing that someone is having a decline in their performance or they're not showing up for work as often, maybe not meeting deadlines, these are things that would indicate that there might be an additional support need there. Again, some of these other things like a life transition, as well as if someone's just asking for that support.
Yeah, and just to tag on to that, Sarah, if I can, one thing I'd encourage you to think about is the question of how many of your employees know that you have an EAP or who it is. You know, Sarah mentioned that utilization is typically quite low for many EAPs. And it's not because they don't provide a great service, they do. A lot of it is we just don't communicate well about what resources are available to our people. And, you know, when we talk about, you know, to go back to those earlier slides, that 75% of our people need some form of support. Yet maybe within your company, 5 or 8 or 10% at the top end have reached out and utilized the EAP. There's a gap there. And there could be a lot of reasons for that, but one of the things I'm always struck by is how many employees don't even know they have an EAP or what it does. Don't expect that just because you put it in an HR manual that people are aware of it and are using it. Put it out there. Make it known to folks. Communicate with them what the benefits are. And oftentimes that alone will prompt some utilization for people that need it. So.
A great point, Tyler. Getting access to services can be a challenge regardless of the resources that may be available or not. Oftentimes because individuals have to take that step. They have to make that phone call. They have to ask for the help, and we aren't always as likely to do that. And that's where this proactive support really comes into play. And the intent with the proactive support is that it really is to promote that sustained well-being. This isn't about necessarily addressing a mental illness. This isn't treatment, but this is something to help individuals maintain their wellness even through difficult times. But part of being proactive means that we have to get the support into the hands of the people who need it. And so we have to try to bridge that gap between and EAP resources, our employees and their health insurance benefits. So by creating flexible options, we can help to meet individuals wherever they're at, whatever their needs may be and whatever barriers may exist to them. I just want to touch on a few of those barriers that tend to come up when it comes to traditional mental health services and EAP support. One is often scheduling, especially when many of you noted that work demands are really high right now, that work environments are incredibly stressful, work-life balance is a challenge. Even scheduling an appointment can sometimes be a barrier to accessing services. Those competing demands, well, gosh, when I get off work, I've got kids to deal with, I've got dinner to make, I've got all these responsibilities to others, so maybe fitting in a full 1-hour session with someone or even calling an employee assistance program isn't top of mind or is hard to fit into the schedule. For many others, transportation can be a barrier or access, particularly for those who are living in rural areas. Even just finding an office could be over an hour away, limiting ability to engage in those standard traditional services. And then there are even the stigmas of mental health services and mental illness. Well, gosh, does this imply that something's wrong with me if I'm asking for support? Am I crazy? Am I weak? Am I, all of these harmful terms that can be utilized to sometimes keep individuals from acknowledging a mental health issue or even addressing it. And then as Tyler kind of hinted at before, there's that uncertainty as well with the EAP. People may not be very familiar with what services are available, and same with traditional care. Well, what's going to happen if I go to therapy? What's this going to be like? Am I going to have to talk about all these things I don't want to talk about? What am I committing to? So all of these things can keep people from taking that step, kind of stepping over the threshold to access support services that are available. So that's when we have to look at some of the other ways that we can reach people, things like making a phone call or providing support on-site or virtually in the office or workspace setting, whatever that may look like, as well as app-based support. So I'll turn it over to Tyler to talk a little bit more about each of those options.
Yeah, and before I do, if I can just go back for a minute, Sarah, I want us to think about, in the solutions bucket here, what Sarah was talking about in the common barriers is, a lot of those have been around in our world, in the mental health world, for a long time, right? When I was trained in graduate school, the concept of if I wasn't in the same room with the person I was providing therapy to, there was something wrong with that, or it wasn't going to be as good as if I was in the same room. You would just never even consider it. In the same vein, if we take a look at, outside of our world, I haven't been inside of a bank for I don't know how long, but I bank all the time. The modality has changed. It's become more convenient, but also more effective. And, many of us have a gazillion apps on our smartphone for the same thing. There's just not, as technology and our mindsets have changed, so too has our willingness to accept new ways of doing things. And what we found, with COVID, a lot of that change was forced, right? Because it wasn't even an option to go into my doctor's office for psychotherapy. That wasn't an option. I was forced to make that change. But what we're seeing, just the same as we're seeing many office places go, we're going to allow remote work now permanently. This isn't no longer a temporary fix. Is people are realizing it works, and it is just as effective, and I am just as productive. And so what we're going to talk about in the next several slides is really kind of a continuation of that line of thinking of, how do we adapt mental health support for our current times and our current, way of living. So, there's several what we're calling innovative options, and these aren't necessarily innovative in that they're like brand new and haven't been out there, but they're innovative in terms of how we've typically thought about supporting people with mental illness or with stress or with other struggles they might be experiencing. There are several app-based tools out there. I won't even name them because I think I probably know about 3% of them, but they're out there. But the concept of I can pick up my phone and get some helpful tips, maybe you learn some breathing exercises, maybe find some fact sheets, maybe, get some, hey, if you're feeling stressed, here are 5 things you can practice, and maybe that app will prompt me 3 times a day to take a break, to go for a walk, whatever it is. A lot of what we talk about in this world of stress management and all the things that you highlighted in the poll results, it's really basic stuff. You just got to do it, right? You have to embed it. In the apps that are out there, our company has one that we use. Many EAPs have apps that they use as well. And then there's, just kind of free sourced or, easy to find ones that are free out there. They all kind of serve the same purpose. It's just a matter of finding what works for you. We're also seeing an increase in artificial intelligence, chat support, where you can, instead of talking with a live person or a live therapist, there's a chatbot that's designed to take your questions, your responses, and build off of that. We would never suggest that this takes the place of a real person or a live interaction. But the reality is, in many cases, for that basic early on stuff, the chatbot will function pretty well and get people what they need or get people the resources. And our version of the chatbot, and I'm not saying this to sell it or anything like that, but our version is designed so that if a certain threshold gets crossed or certain things get said, it transfers you to a live person. So it's not just purely a text solution. The text solution that funnels you to a real person in times when that real person is absolutely necessary. And I'm sure there are others that do the same as well. Sorry, go ahead, Sarah.
Oh, that's okay. I was just going to say, if I could jump in on these, just to comment on these first two, I think one of the really amazing things about leveraging technology in this way to bring support to the hands of the individuals who need it is that it helps to really reduce that stigma barrier. Because if I can jump on an app and get some helpful information, or if I can chat with somebody without having to put all of my information out there or worry that I'm maybe going to run into them in the grocery store, probably more likely to engage if I'm feeling some of that doubt about accessing mental health support. So it really helps to bridge that gap from no support to traditional services by helping individuals feel more comfortable and confident and having that sense of anonymity in the support that they're accessing.
Yeah, thanks, Sarah. That's a great point and one that I meant to make, so thanks for bringing that up. A lot of what we're talking about here takes away some of that stigma that Sarah talked about earlier. Frankly, even being able to go to a therapy session without having to drive to the office and being able to do it from your house. No one knows what you're doing. No one knows your car is parked outside of some office that they know there's a therapist there. So all of it, that we're on virtual meetings and Teams meetings all day long. So what's the difference? It's no different. It's just another meeting that looks and feels much the same as what we're already doing. The third section on here is what we're conceptualizing as more individualized outreach or specific outreach. We have some experience as an organization and as the professionals within our organization doing this. We've done it telephonically, we've done it virtually, and we've done it in person. And this is really, that live support with a real clinician. Real clinician is a bad term, not to say that they're fake ones. Live support with a clinician. And we have some experience doing this with several large organizations, one large retail organization, one large healthcare organization, where they just realized my people are struggling and I don't know what they need, but I think they benefit from having an expert there just to talk to, right? There's no preconceived, you need to go talk to them. There's not a specific agenda, but they're there. And maybe they're there once a week for 2 hours. And, over the course of a month or 2 months, maybe, 30% of your people funnel through and talk to that person and get some help. And, it's informal help. Again, it's that early on stuff, but maybe that person, for people that need more help, can help them to, here's your EAP resources. Here's some potential avenues to get more help for that. What we found, and I was honestly quite surprised, although I shouldn't have been, is the organizations that did that, some type of live support with the clinician, the employees benefited greatly from it, even if the benefit was that they didn't use the person, but they just knew that the person was there. What we're seeing right now with a lot of organizations is that, if you're supporting your people, that gets noticed by your people. And if you're not supporting your people, that also gets noticed by your people. And so even the concept of, we're going to bring someone in as a support for anyone who happens to need it, even if you don't need it, the fact that you as an organization care enough to do that pays dividends in terms of the employees feeling like, hey, my employer really supports me in this. And what we're seeing, and this is a bit off topic, so I'll make it super brief, is over the next year, and some of you are already seeing it. In fact, I was just talking to a large employer this morning. People are leaving. People are finding new jobs. And some of that is a reflection of, over the past year and a half or more, did my employer do the right thing? And really what we're talking about here in this support is, did they support me? Not just in my paycheck or in my work duties, but me as a person, as I've gone through what we've all gone through. Do they care about me? That really does make a pretty big difference. So I will stop there and move on to the next slide here. So some of the benefits of what I just talked about, the well-being service, and I jumped the gun on this. I do this a lot in presentations because I get talking and I stop paying attention to when I should be talking. But it demonstrates your commitment to your employees. And right now, that commitment to employees is a big deal. It promotes a culture of wellness, right? You have a culture that fosters, shoving it under the rug and kind of ignoring things and just being focused on work productivity? Or is your culture one that embraces wellness? And this is not, by the way, you all need to be touchy-feely and not focused on productivity and any of that stuff. And that's important, right? That's work. Work is work. But is the general culture one that, if I'm struggling, can I reach out and ask for help? And will I get some response that's helpful for me? Increasing loyalty, reducing absenteeism, improving productivity, and really realizing that healthy employees lead to healthy organizations. When I talk with business leaders, when we talk to business leaders, they're often focused on the bottom line, as they should be. Their job is to run a business, and the business is to make money, and that money is what pays everyone's salaries. But those that can realize that, $1 spent on wellness will have a fourfold increase in the bottom line are going to be better off, right? Those that realize that, healthy employees really do contribute significantly to the bottom line, and more importantly, or the converse of that, unhealthy employees are going to really have a detrimental impact on your bottom line. Sarah, anything else? I know I ran through that a bit quickly. Anything else you want to throw in there?
Yeah, I actually wanted to revisit that culture of mental wellness because I think we talk a lot about wellness as a general concept here, and sometimes when we focus on wellness, it's more on the physical aspect of it. But I think what well-being services and proactive outreach services do is that they normalize mental health support. And so while historically, it wasn't uncommon to notice in workplaces that mental health wasn't generally discussed until somebody was out on a mental health leave, and then it was something that people whispered about as, gosh, they couldn't cut it, they couldn't handle the stress of the job. It was just an expectation that people could cope on their own and would be seen as a weakness if an employee needed time off to take care of themselves. But bringing this into the workplace takes away, again, that stigma of mental illness and treatment as, something that's wrong with someone, and it recognizes it as just self-care, something very natural and normal, a good, healthy behavior that we all should be doing. And it also recognizes or helps employees to recognize that their employer supports that. Helps them understand that it's okay for me to take care of myself, because ultimately if they take care of themselves, they're better equipped to take care of the company. Tying back to that healthy employees and healthy organizations. So I think that all of this really ties together, because the more, the better off employees are, the more they recognize the value of their employer's support and are appreciative of that, the more effective they are in their jobs, and it's just a compounding success in that way.
One more thing, and we'll move on to the next slide actually, but one thing I wanted to mention as I was listening to Sarah talk about that, and it's something we often miss because I'm guessing a lot of us here today are in management level positions. Nobody needs everything we're talking about more than your managers in your organization. We often think about, how do I get this to my people, to my subordinates, to this department? But what we've seen in particular is the people that are struggling the most are your management level people. Because why? Well, they have the same everyday stress as everyone else, plus they have the stress of managing other people, and they have, more weight on their shoulders. And so as you're thinking about this, don't just think about, how do I get this out to my team? Think about, how do I get this to my management groups? I just wanted to highlight that before we move on to the next slide.
I'm so glad you mentioned that, because it reminds me of some research I saw probably earlier on during the pandemic that referenced the fact that leaders are the least likely to show when they're impacted by a mental illness in the workplace, because as leaders, we're so dedicated to our jobs that work performance is the last thing to be impacted. And so that highlights even more that importance of reaching managers, because not only are they the ones bearing the weight of their own stressors as well as their employees' stressors, but they're the least likely to show that they need it or communicate that they need it. So we have to be proactive in offering it even before we recognize the need. And so that's why I kind of go back to that. When are we offering proactive support? Anytime and to anyone. It goes back to that, 75% of employees who, even though they don't need treatment, need some sort of mental wellness support. So it's always appropriate to offer proactive support, but there may be some other circumstances that could indicate that that it may be especially needed. So if you're not able to offer it to everyone all the time, maybe during times where the workload is more demanding or more stressful than usual, or say for right now, that example, work-life imbalances. Employees who are parents are transitioning their kids back to school, whether that's in person or virtually, and that can create an additional weight on families and on employees during this time. So this might be a great time to do that. As well as if you're seeing those stress reactions, maybe not with a particular individual, but you're seeing them more broadly. This might be another time to engage those proactive support services. Did you want to add anything to that?
No, I think that covers it well. So thanks for covering those things. I think we have some questions, but I'm going to just cover some parting thoughts here. And really, this is nothing. These are all things that we've talked about. But we know right now employee mental health is suffering, right? And recognizing that is the first step in doing something about it. We also know that traditional methods of care aren't meeting all of the needs. They're clearly meeting some of them, but it's missing a lot of people. There's the holes in the net are too big. Some people are slipping through. However, we have more tools than we've ever had before. I mean, one of the concept of like destruction breeds creation, right? Not that COVID is destruction, but the necessary, the significant impact of COVID has bred creation in our field in terms of how we do what we do. Let's take advantage of that. And like Sarah has mentioned, and we both mentioned, being proactive versus reactive. Reactivity, certainly you need to do it at times. As a company, we do a lot of reactive stuff, but we try and do more proactive stuff. Just because the proactive stuff is typically less intensive and is typically cheaper and is typically more helpful. I'd rather give someone the tools so that when something happens, they can cope with it than try and help them after something bad has already happened. So, Sarah, if you have anything else, throw it in there. Otherwise, Shane, do we have any questions that have come in?
Yeah, we do. I could take it away for just a second here, and then we can get started with questions. So if you do have any questions, please feel free to put them in the Q&A box. I know we went over quite a bit of information there, but we do already have some questions ready to go. So before we hop into those, I did want to remind everyone that this is a CE webinar, which means it's been pre-approved to equal 1 hour of continuing education credits by the Commission of the Case Manager, otherwise known as CCM. This webinar is also approved by the SHRM's recertification provider and will be offering 1 professional development credit, or PDC, for the SHRM certification program. So at the end of this webinar, you'll be asked to complete a quick evaluation, and once you complete that, you'll be provided access to a downloadable certificate of completion. You can find that down in the widgets below. So one more thing before we jump into questions, so please keep them coming. I see we have a few more as well. I want to take this time to invite everyone to our next webinar. That will be Tuesday, September 21st at 12 p.m. Central Time. This webinar is titled Proactive Workplace Violence Prevention, a new look at the behavioral health side of workplace safety. Our presenters for that webinar will be R3 Continuum Medical Director, Dr. George Vergolius, as well as Senior Vice President Hart Brown. That will be an Ask the Expert webinar, which means any of your questions will drive the content for the webinar. So it's a very cool chance to get any of your questions answered by our experts. So if you're interested in registering for that webinar or would like to know more, check out the link in the resource tab or click register here in the widget on the screen. So let's get started with some questions. And I want to ask one that came in pretty early. I think I'll ask this one to you, Sarah. What should an organization be looking for an EAP to have?
You know, that's a really great question. I think when it comes to employee assistance programs, there's such a variety of support resources that are available, and of course the cost and the number of employees that you have are all factors in how an EAP can meet your needs. But some of the most basic things are just making sure that they have 24/7 access for employees to call, as well as looking into what type of psychotherapy benefits do employees have. Do they have a certain number of sessions that could be included in that benefit? Do they offer disruptive event management services? Do they have the capability to bring someone on site or to make calls to your organization or to identified employees? These are all things to look for with an EAP and really make sure that they're able to tailor to your organization's needs. Do they have the bandwidth of a network for referrals to people in the areas where your employees tend to be located? These are just a few examples, but I think the most important thing when it comes to finding an EAP is finding one that will really work with your company's needs, understanding those needs, taking the time for that, and finding ways together to make sure that those are met. Tyler, I don't know if you want to add anything to that.
No, that's a great summary, and I would echo what you said about, finding an EAP that works with your company, your culture and what you know about your people. The more you can try and, find the right fit. Like she said, cost and some of those kind of things are always considerations. But we see a lot of instances where the right employer matched with the right EAP, they have a lot of synergy and they do good things. So, yeah.
Excellent. Thank you both for answering that. The next question here, and I think we'll have you start off with this one, Dr. Arvig. Can you give an example, or could you give a couple more examples of some red flags that an employee may be struggling at work and needs some support in getting help?
Sure. And, there's going to be a lot of different things, and I would say your first line of defense on this is going to be that person's manager and maybe even their coworkers. But really what I'm looking for is stuff that seems like it's changed, something that seems unusual. That could be a decline in work performance. It could be if they're working remotely, they stop turning the camera on, they're showing up late for meetings, maybe they become emotional in meetings or in interactions where that's unusual. Maybe they've even verbalized that they're struggling with things at home. If you're hearing or seeing any of that, it doesn't mean you need to pull out all the stops and get them help immediately, but it probably means it's worth engaging in a conversation. Because oftentimes you won't see people that are struggling, especially now that people are working from home. We don't have those day-to-day interactions. So I can't see Sarah every day in the office, and I don't notice changes in her appearance perhaps or her behavior because I'm not seeing her. I'm only seeing her in particular situations. So if you're seeing those things, changes in behaviors, changes in attendance, changes in mood or concentration, or they're dropping the ball where they normally don't, it doesn't mean they're struggling with something, but it means that's probably worth having a conversation to see if they need some help.
I think that change, you mentioned change there. That's an important thing to really pay attention to, because while we can list a number of red flags, we won't, in this conversation, we won't be able to be fully inclusive of all potential red flags, but that change in behavior is generally an indication that something's going on there. So, have a little bit more of a conversation.
Excellent. And I kind of jumped around here because this next question, I think, follows that up pretty well. How do I communicate to my employees that I want to support them in any way they need? Should I be going to them directly if I think they need help, or should I make a more blanket statement? Which is more effective?
I'll
Dr.
start with that, and then Sarah, you can jump in. I think when it comes to this, and I feel like a broken record on this, if you've heard me present before, you'll roll your eyes at this, but communication is key. I want to address my people. Now, as a group, maybe I want to address them. Say, look, we're all, sorting this out together. This is a challenge for everyone. I just want you to know, we're here to support you, and here are some things that we have. Don't do this in an email. Don't just put it in your HR manual. Say it like you mean it, right? So on a broad level, have those larger group conversations, but then also I think there's also a place for the second part, which is following up with people directly, or maybe you do smaller groups. It doesn't mean you're targeting somebody necessarily, but obviously, people are more likely to admit that they need help or they could benefit from it if it's, a more private situation versus the group one. So, Sarah, anything you want to tack on there?
Yeah, actually, you answered that very well. My answer was going to be yes, both. I do think we need to have those conversations so that the information is available to everyone, but then, address on a more individualized level. And get creative with how you communicate that information. Some of the things that I've done in the past to help make sure that EAP support or other benefits that are available stay front of mind is to say, hey, I checked out the EAP website and they had a really great article or resource. I wanted to share this with everyone. If you're interested, here's the website. You can go see more articles. So just to get them checking that out and understanding what's there, where the resource is. Or even just, hey, I called with this quick question, and, you want to make sure that it's something that's appropriate to share with your teams. But, hey, I called with this question, and this was the process, so I just thought that might be helpful information for people to know. Those are things that you can kind of pass along that, one, help to normalize it, help people to feel comfortable that, hey, my managers are doing this. Our company takes advantage of this. Maybe I should give it a try. Because the number of times that I've heard somebody say, well, gosh, this is how I took advantage of this resource. helps to bring awareness, and word of mouth is sometimes the best referral. So I think any way that we can be creative and get that communication out there, whether it's in group settings, those blanket statements, or the more individualized approaches, is really effective.
I love it. Great perspective from both of you. Thank you. Sarah, I'll actually go back to you for this one. This question is, you mentioned transportation being an issue for well-being services. Have these services been utilized more now that there are virtual opportunities? Is it still as effective?
Yes. Now, I don't have any statistics to share with you on that, but I will say that, yes, employees are more taking advantage of virtual and telephonic services more than ever. And yes, it is still as effective. There's research into telehealth and into telephonic mental health services that indicate that, yes, they are just as effective. And actually, I've seen some research as well on chat and text mental health support that indicates the same, that as long as the modalities are evidence-based and supported in research, then the way in which people access it really does not make a difference. Now, I think the one caveat to that is choice. So if people are comfortable using virtual platforms or telephonic platforms, then they're going to find it just as effective. If they're uncomfortable with them, they may not find it as effective, or vice versa. Some people are more comfortable with those platforms than meeting in office. So effectiveness is really not a question there, but I personally believe that choice is important.
Excellent. And this one is pretty specific, but Dr. Arvig, I think it would be good for you to respond to this one. How do we support an employee with a family member that died to suicide?
Yeah, this is a tough one. As an organization, we see a lot, unfortunately, we see a lot of employees impacted by suicide. You know, and many of us in our personal lives have known people who have died by suicide as well. So I think, you know, as an organization, you know, letting that person know that you're there to support them, that this is a very challenging time, and probably also taking a more proactive approach. Again, if the individual who's affected by it is known to you and you have a relationship with them, probably taking a more proactive approach to getting them hooked up with the EAP, maybe doing a warm handoff. Don't just say, here's the number. Say, hey, you know, is there any way we can help you to get hooked up, because we have this support in place. And maybe even some EAPs might even offer some family interventions to work not only with that employee, but with other folks that were affected by it. So it's a situation where, you know, you want to certainly handle it in a very sensitive manner. You want to respect people's, you know, privacy, because, you know, just because I had someone die by suicide doesn't mean I want you asking questions or getting me help necessarily, but also realizing that that's a really tough situation. Someone's going to struggle a bit with that. And it might impact their performance at work, and being, you know, understanding of that, and also supporting them, you know. So when they're struggling, being understanding that, hey, for the next week or 2 weeks, you might be off your game, or maybe you even need some time off. But then how do we get you the help to process what happened to the extent that you can, to get that support that you need? And, you know, you don't want to say, you know, come out the other side fine, because you don't, but at least maintain whatever level of functioning you can through that very difficult process. Sarah, anything else? I know you have quite a bit of experience in this arena with those types of cases.
Yeah, I think you explained it very well. I think it's going to be individualized to each person, and so there's not necessarily one quick answer that's going to cover it, but communicating that support, again, normalizing the need for a break, or the limitations that someone may experience at work as far as, their performance or their attendance, things of that nature in that short time afterwards, and helping get them connected to the proper resources for next steps in additional care. I think just knowing that you don't have to be the only resource is sometimes a little bit helpful, and just getting them connected to the, say the EAP or other resources that your company offers is most important here.
And oftentimes, in these cases, a lot of what happens in those EAP sessions, a lot of people's fears, if I'm the affected employee, certainly I have my own emotional stuff here, and that's deep and that's pressing. A lot of people's fears are, what do I do when people ask me questions? What if I break down at work? It's stuff that we wouldn't necessarily think of as, how do I respond to a coworker that asks me a question? Or what if someone says something and I lose it? Because it's going to happen. So a lot of that support is really at work, how do I protect myself but yet stay present and do some of those things? So even for folks that maybe aren't, as impacted by it as you or I might be, there's still value in learning some of those practical, like how do I manage the situation when it comes up?
Awesome. Thank you both for your insight on that. That was a tough question, but I appreciate you both taking the time to address that. We have just a couple of minutes left, so if you have any questions, please feel free to send them in. I did want to address one here. Looking for some names and links to wellness apps. As Dr. Arvig did point out earlier, there is tons out there, and they all are great for different uses. If you want to check out the R3C resources in the resource tab, that will actually take you to a page where you can access the resiliency app, which is an app that R3 Continuum has developed, and that can help give some insight on what some of these apps can do. So I just kind of wanted to step in and answer that one to hopefully provide some more insight for you. One more here for you, Sarah. Family stressors had quite a few responses in the poll. How would I know if an employee is struggling with something outside of work?
I'll really go back to what Tyler said, is communication is key. We aren't clairvoyant by any means, so we can't have any way of knowing if someone's struggling outside of work without communicating. And part of that is both verbally and non-verbally. So not only offering your support, checking in with employees, but also recognizing some of those nonverbal cues, some of those changes in behavior. And if you see that there are changes, asking the questions, how are you doing? Is there anything going on? Anything I can support you with? The more we can stay engaged and check in with people, the more we're going to find out about what's going on in their personal lives. I recognize that there are some professional boundaries, of course, within the workplace, that people may not bring all of their personal stressors to work, but sometimes also understanding that we may not be the person that they want to talk to about that stuff, and not pushing for that information, but just creating an opening if they want to share it is effective as well. And that's where, if you're not sure, or maybe you have an inkling that something's wrong, or you really just can't gauge, make sure that you provide those other resources. So providing a proactive outreach support for somebody who may not be likely to pick up the phone to make a call, but might touch base on an app or chat with someone, or even just answer the phone if it rings, or might talk to somebody who stops in at the office. These are ways where we can help them to get that support even if they're not directly sharing it with you.